job interview is one of the most anxiety-provoking situations most people can find themselves in, even when they go to plan. But what happens when you have your worst interview ever? Our guests share their worst interviews ever in the hope that you will take something from their mistakes to have a more successful interview outcome. Some of the stories are horrific and some are just downright embarrassing. Let's join our host, Kevin O'Reilly, the interview skills coach with over 25 years experience in the fields of coaching and recruitment. Let's welcome our guests to the show.
Welcome to another episode of My Worst Job Interview Ever with me, your host, Kevin O'Reilly, the interview skills coach. Did you know that the interview process is one of the main barriers to most individuals changing jobs? This show is for anyone who has an interview coming up or is wanting to prepare for one in the future. Our guests have been there, done that, and are still doing it at the top levels of business, and they share with us their worst job interviews ever on their journey so we can learn from their experiences so you can get the job or career you deserve. Some are unbelievable and some are just embarrassing. Today we have on the show Freddie Harris, an area manager for Young Enterprise NI. Freddie describes himself as a serial switcher, having moved from private sector to public sector, as well as starting up his own business. Freddie has a real passion for empowering the young through delivering employability and entrepreneurship programs to students across Northern Ireland. Freddie, how are you today?
I am very well, thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me on.
No problem. It is an absolute pleasure to have you on. But from that little introduction there, it sounds like you have a lot to offer our listeners.
Well, I hope so. I've made a habit of not making a career for myself, let's put it that way. I've chopped and changed a wee bit. I've worked across the different sectors. And I mean, I'll be brutally honest with you, Kevin, I think I get bored quite easily. Once I feel like something isn't a challenge anymore, I'm looking to see what else is out there. I think there have been benefits to that, over the course of my working life, but obviously there have been some downsides to that as well. But if any of my experience can help your listeners, then it's only going to be a good thing.
Well, that's wonderful. Thanks, Freddie. Thank you very much. Now, before we get into the meat and bones of why we're here today, I do this with all my guests on the show. Tell us something that potentially not very many people know about you.
Well, as you mentioned, I once upon a time ran my own business, which was a health and nutrition business. Essentially, I was a personal trainer, but I was very fortunate in that I was able to run clients through my own gym. I converted a large old mechanics garage into a studio gym, and I was running clients through that on a one-on-one basis, but also running small circuit sessions as well. COVID obviously changed the nature of that business a good deal. Not necessarily in a bad way, we just had to pivot quite a bit. And through the course of that change of direction, I decided to prioritize different things in my life and step back from the business, which means I'm now left with a rather nice, large private gym that's probably had a little bit too much space in it just for me and the family. So at the minute, I'm converting a corner of that gym into my own private sauna. I'm doing it completely myself. I have some practical experience with woodwork, but this is very much a passion project for me, a bit of a journey. I'm learning while I do it, which is one of my big things that I love. Before when I got into a project, I might have looked to do it as quickly as I could because, time was at a premium, something needed to be done straight away. I didn't really have time to enjoy the process. I was just looking for that result. Whereas this is very, very different. This is very much about the process. Yes, I would like to have a fully functional sauna at the end of it, but I'm looking to learn as much as I can through the journey, taking my time, doing it bit by bit, just really enjoying that process, which for me is brand new. It's a brand new way of going about things, because I have a little bit more time I have the luxury that there's no deadline for this, let's put it that way.
Sometimes that's a bad thing, though, not having a deadline. You know,
Sometimes that's a bad
sometimes
thing.
it is. Yeah, sometimes it could
Well,
go on for years if there's no real deadline, especially if you're calling it a passion project. So you're not really putting any real emphasis on finishing there, Freddie.
well, I say there's no deadline. I obviously would love it to be finished for this winter coming.
Oh, that would be lovely, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
Freddie, after this, you're gonna have to tell me where you live. Is this a two-man? There's this three. What is it? Just a single?
We could fit. That sounds like a challenge. That's right. I say two grown adults comfortably, and you could probably squeeze a third small person like me in there. So we could. Our next podcast, Kevin, could be a Sunday sauna session.
Ah, I like it. I like it. I might just borrow
Thoughts
that
from the
idea.
sauna?
Sunday sauna. Really, thanks for that. I'm sure there will be not many people out there that's going to have their own private large gym with a sauna as well.
It's a
Yeah, you're
perk, I
doing all right.
suppose, of giving that a go. Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
that's it, isn't it? And I think that potentially shows the type of person you are, that you'll just give it a go and you'll learn as you're going along instead of waiting till you know everything before you even try. And I think that actually stops a lot of people in their tracks, not having that capabilities in the first instance, which then they can't do anything with because they believe that they have to know how to do it first before they even take it on. But I love that sort of attitude you have.
Yeah, absolutely, Kevin. I couldn't agree more. I think, I mean, it is also a big ethos with Young Enterprise Northern Ireland, who I know I work with. Their motto is, learning by doing. And on a personal level, I'm fully behind that 100%. I think so many people, the vast majority, as you say, don't give something a go because they think that they don't have the skills or the experience they need. But everybody needs to start somewhere. Everybody needs to start somewhere. And I think what really brought this home to me was we bought a bit of a fixer upper, myself and my wife, before the kids came along. And we spent about 8 years renovating our house from top to bottom. And we had noticed with interactions with tradespeople, and seeing finished work that some tradespeople had done and been paid for and walked away from happy, we were looking at that going, that just, it hasn't been done in a way that we would be happy with. And if we're going to, do up this house, make this home our forever home, bring up kids here, we want it to be as good as we can possibly make it, but we also need to keep an eye on our budget. So we started doing a lot of the work ourselves. We started learning about how to do these things. My father-in-law is very handy. He taught us a lot as well. And we found that no one, no one probably really knows exactly what they're going into when they start a job like that. Even tradespeople come in, they'll start a job and they don't really know how it's going to go. So they do the very best they can. Now, a tradesperson is likely coming in with a bit more skills, a bit more experience, certainly than we were. But give yourself a long enough time frame and you can become good at something, or you can become adequately good at something. You can be good enough at it. And, you know, if you can do something 70 to 80% of the capability of somebody else, but it costs you 50% of the price, why not do it? If your main aim is to save a bit of money and get something done to a good enough level, why not give it a go? So yeah, don't be afraid to try something new.
Absolutely. And I think again, just that ethos that you have could potentially be the reason why it is run through your journey, from public sector, private sector, running your own business. It is potentially that ethos that is continuing you to move forward and has landed you exactly where you are now. So listen, tell us a little bit more about that. Where did this all begin? Where did this journey begin?
Well, my journey began probably where a lot of young people find themselves at 16, 17, 18 at school. Maybe they've just done their GCSEs, maybe they're thinking about their A levels. And I think a lot of the messaging from school and maybe from our support networks at home tends to be stay at school for as long as you can, do as many exams as you can, do as well academically as you can, and see where you go from there. I wanted to leave school at 16. I had this romantic idea in my head of the adventure that was out there for me, the adventure that awaited. different countries, different experiences. I was going to see and do it all. And a teacher of mine who became, I wouldn't say a friend, but certainly he became a bit of a mentor. He persuaded me to stay on after my GCSEs and do my A levels. And he said, look, if you still want to go out and see the world straight away, at least you'll have a couple of A levels in your back pocket. And of course, my mum at home was dying for me to do the same thing. But quite often at that age, we don't listen to our parents the way we should. And sometimes it takes another adult who we respect and admire to kind of give us that little bit of advice. So I've always been very thankful that he did that. And then, of course, after my A
Freddie, sorry for
levels,
interrupting you there. I think someone had told me once before that it's hard to respect someone when you've seen them in their underpants. Okay.
Well, that means I'm in a lot of trouble, Kevin.
Sorry, continue on, Freddie. Continue on.
So after my A levels, the same teacher again said, look, I know you're busting to get out there, but you've done well enough to go to university. So how about you go to university, you get your degree, you have that university experience, which, isn't purely academic, and you see where you go from there, see where you land after that. And I listened to him again and I went and did it again. And I'm not saying that I necessarily have regrets around that, but I think here was the point in time where I could have made some different decisions and it wouldn't necessarily have had a massive impact on where I've ended up, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Now, this is going back 22 years. And back then, a university degree of any shape or form, no matter what paper it was printed on, was seen as being valuable by potential employers. I think that is what has changed quite a bit, or what I've noticed has changed quite a bit, certainly in the last 5 to 10 years, is that employers aren't as fixated on paper qualifications. They want to see well-rounded young people or well-rounded potential employees coming into the organization. And that obviously can mean a lot more than just academic qualifications. But I went to university. I got my undergraduate degree in environmental science, and I found a workplace. I found a future workplace that wasn't ready for me anyway. They were looking for more. They wanted the master's degree, or they wanted the 3 or 4 years experience, and I didn't have that. So I volunteered. I went out. I got myself some skills, got myself some experience, and then the first swerve ball came in. The first change of direction. So to this point, I'd very much been fixated on a career within the environmental sector, whether it was conservation or research work, whatever it might be. And at the time, I was working for the National Trust in County Fermanagh. And I got an email from a friend of mine from university days who was out teaching in South Korea. Just, how's things going? Here's what I'm up to, just a bit of a catch up. And suddenly something clicked with me. I realized that if I wanted to get ahead in the environmental sector, I needed a master's degree. But I was already crippled by existing student debt, and I didn't want to get into more debt. So I needed to earn some money. More importantly, I needed to be able to save money, and I knew that wasn't going to happen where I was in County Fermanagh. So I went out to Korea and I got a job teaching English at what they call hagwons, which are like after school academies. Maybe this is what I should have told your listeners that people might find surprising about me. I once taught in South Korea for a couple of years. So I went out there, taught for a couple of years, was able to save a decent amount of money. I was able to spend a lot too and travel a bit around Southeast Asia. But I came back and I was able to do a master's then without incurring any further debt. And I did that in sustainable development at Queen's University. Stayed at home to save myself a bit more money. And that then was what allowed me to get into the environmental sector, I'm going to say properly, but into a role that I felt had that scope, had that room for promotion, development, to really, I felt, make a difference, which ultimately was my primary objective. I wanted my work to make a difference. Fast forward then some 10 years where I've worked for renewable energy companies. I've worked for some different environmental charities, and I'm fed up, Kevin. I'm really fed up. My perhaps naive view on how I was going to make a difference to the world has come full stop into a brick wall. And, I think I'm now 10 years older. I've had my eyes open to the real world, to the nature of how these things work in practice. Northern Ireland in particular is quite a small pond, especially when it comes to the environmental sector and the conservation sector in particular. You have a number of small and large charities all fighting for the same funding. That doesn't always look great. It doesn't always end well. And then there's the issue of the what I would deem the misspending of funds. Now, I think that's going to be witnessed in every sector. Not every employee within an organization is going to be happy with how they spend money and happy with how they try and progress their mission, their vision, and their values. But I think I found certainly that what I had thought 10 years ago was going to be my course of action in the course of my career, I just wasn't seeing what I wanted to see. When certainly I felt that there were better ways to go about doing what they were doing, and this it wasn't just me being unhappy with what was going on. It was also in the back of my head. There'd always been a little itch. There would always be something I wanted to try, and that was doing something for myself from scratch, creating something that was bigger than just me. And I suppose giving myself the confidence and knowing that I had the ability and I had the mental strength to make something work long term. I'm not going to say completely off my own back, because as the saying goes, no man is an island. We don't really do anything completely on our own. There's always those support networks. There's always those people, those mentors who might talk to. There's always our friends and family who might support us, even if it's just a bit of motivation, a bit of psychological support, a bit of look, you can do this. Don't get discouraged. Keep on going.
I think you're the sort of the lead singer in the band, but without the rest of the band, you're just a person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's it. So I needed my backing singers. And certainly as the journey continued, and what I'm talking about here is starting up my own business in health and fitness. As the momentum built on that, and as the journey got going, the volume of the choir behind me got bigger and bigger, and the noise got bigger and bigger. And I realized that I was on to something that was working. Not only was I doing it, not only was I doing it well, but there was a massive need for it in my local area. What I was putting out there was being very well received. And I think that was huge for my confidence. It probably doesn't really matter what you're actually trying to deliver, what sector you're working in, or what your mission is. When people tell you you're doing a good job, that is huge. It allows you then to put all that confidence into doing more, doing it better, trying something new, recognizing when that doesn't work, stepping back and going again. When your confidence gets a knock, I think your reaction is to kind of start to shrink into yourself. The walls close in a wee bit, maybe the blinkers go up, you get a little bit of tunnel vision, and you find something that you are confident and comfortable with, and you just keep thrashing that to death because that's your comfort zone. And it becomes harder to step out of your comfort zone if your confidence keeps getting knocked. And maybe to a certain extent, that's what was happening to me when I found myself at the end of those 10 years in the environmental sector. Maybe this is what I needed. I needed to step out of that comfort zone to find a new confidence, doing something completely different, to rebuild myself, essentially. And I think that's exactly what happened. I certainly came away from that experience of building my own business very, very confident, very confident in myself. But more than that, very confident in the strength of my networks, in the strength of my support, the backing singers, the band, if you will. I knew I was no longer afraid to ask for help or rely on other people to help me when I needed it. And I think because I did ultimately start that journey, more or less on my own, certainly I was the driving force behind it. I found that very quickly I was needing to ask for help, maybe much more than I would have done before. And when I saw how many people were willing to help with the journey I was on, that gave me more confidence, gave me strength. It gave me that will to succeed and that motivation to continue. And it was huge.
It's just that reinforcement, isn't it? Sometimes we just continue doing what we're doing. We know it's particularly good and particularly right, but sometimes just somebody else outside of our sphere that'll come in and say, Freddie, you're doing a great job. Keep it going. We really appreciate it. Not many people, and I'll say not many, some people don't need that praise, but when it's given, it's completely appreciated. It's
Absolutely.
completely appreciated. Yeah. And I think you and I are very, very similar in that sense where yes, we'll just get up, we'll get on with it, we'll do what needs to be done. And if we can affect positive change and someone comments on that, then it affects more positive change and more positive change and more positive change. But it's like levels, isn't it? You almost need to start to keep moving. Whereas if you didn't start, you're not even going to get to that next level, that next level, and next level. And it's funny and interesting what you'd said about that confidence being knocked and knocked and knocked to the point where you shrink. And that is a lovely way of putting it. You shrink into your comfort zone and you grow out of your comfort zone. And
Yeah.
that is a beautiful sentiment for anybody who is listening right now. If you're comfortable, you have shrank to suit and fit that comfort zone. And it is uncomfortable to move from that. Yes, you're probably the expert in that field. You probably know everything you need to know so that you can't be criticized, so that you won't make a mistake. But if you didn't make a mistake, you weren't making anything because you're not moving forward when you're doing that because you know you're not going to make a mistake. So you're not going to invent anything new. You're not going to change anybody. You're not going to do anything different. And you might come away with that false sense of security and confidence, much like when we're interviewing, or
Mm.
much like when people are being interviewed. The potential opportunity of you being successful in an interview is extremely slim.
Mm.
Most occasions, there's only one job available. On an average, you're talking 134 people go for a skilled job, and nearly 351 people go for a non-skilled job. And if that's narrowed down to only one person, then you're disappointing 99.9% of the people. So how does that continue to happen over and over again? And I touched on a point that you had made about volunteering to gain experience. That's a really lovely thought. When you're a college student or university student, over the summer, over your evenings or weekends, could you be volunteering to gain that experience that you potentially might need going forward? Yes, we all need to hang out and chill out with our mates and enjoy our life there. But it's about doing that extra little bit in the background. And that's what a lot of employers look for. They don't just see that as experience, they see it as an attitude. They see
Mm.
that as a good behavior that they would like to see in a potential employee. Because if they're going to do that when they don't have to, what are they going to do when they're asked to?
Exactly, Kevin. Absolutely. And I mean, that is particularly relevant in the conservation and environmental sectors, because competition for jobs is so high, and because a lot of the roles you're going into are particularly skill based. Quite often, the only way to get those skills is to volunteer, but it does extends beyond that, and certainly another big change that I've noticed over the last few years is that there are a lot more of these high level apprenticeship schemes going on, so the likes of your PwCs and your Deloittes, and they're getting young people in on apprenticeships. And the chances are, if you haven't been on one of those apprenticeships or you haven't been on one of their summer schemes, their internships. If you haven't been involved with them in some way, shape, or form, you're unlikely to get those jobs. It's a very good pathway through. And, really, it's exactly as you say, it's not necessarily just about the skills, the knowledge, and the experience. It's the attitude, it's the mindset. It's that they look at you as a 16, 17, 18-year-old, and they know that you're willing to do what it takes to work for them or in that sector or in that industry. It's showing a willingness to get involved. And that, I think, now employers are realizing that the attitude, the mindset, that is so much more important than the bit of paper showing the qualifications.
Yeah, yeah, that is the case, and with a lot of businesses I speak to, they're now moving not so much away from, but they're just minimizing it, the qualifications. Now, don't get me wrong, I like my doctor to have a qualification and and have a doctorate. Don't get me wrong, I don't want someone just coming off the street saying, listen, I've read a couple of books and watched a couple of YouTube videos. But yes, there are certain jobs that do not need a degree. There's certain jobs that do not need a doctorate or a master's. But I see it more often now that even non-skilled jobs are looking for a degree. And when I challenge that way of thinking with those business owners, they can't actually explain why. They can't actually explain why they want that. But they've always done it and they've always asked for it. And that's what they continue to do. But as you quite rightly said, the value of a degree now is it's not that it's slipping, it's just that employers are becoming more aware that it's the soft skills and experience that they are looking for, because skills are literally that. They can be developed, they can be grown, they can be shown how to do something completely different. So attitude is a huge part of any of the recruitment and interview process. And it's how you put that across. And some people don't have those skills because they can't see the side of them, that blind side. They just can't see it for themselves. And they need someone like you and someone like me to come in and gently explain what that is. Gently explain to them how you can then turn what you have into something that people want. And when I say something that people want, I mean businesses want. Because ultimately that's where we're going to go. The majority of people will go into working for someone, or they will go out and work for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
For it just and a lovely segues us right into where we need to be and why we're here today with regards to the worst job interview ever. Freddie, would you like to share your worst job interview ever with our listeners?
Do you know, there hasn't been like one particular stinker, to be honest, but there have been a few, Kevin, that were far from ideal. So I would say the first one that really stood out was a local environmental charity who shall remain nameless. And I was going for a program manager role there. So the nature of my role was going to require me to be out and about in the public conducting surveys. And there was a feeling within the organization that this might create a little bit of a backlash from some members of the public. And to be honest, to this day, I'm not really sure where that feeling came from. I think it was a bit unfounded, to be honest. But one of the people conducting my interview was convinced that I might meet people in the day-to-day run of my duties who would have an issue with what I was doing and would maybe verbally abuse me or in some way, shape, or form attack my position. And she had planned to attack me on my way into the room for my interview to see how I responded.
Wow.
Now, she ultimately didn't, but I subsequently got the job, and I was told by another person who was on the interview panel that she had been standing up behind the door ready to grab me as I came in, and she had to be talked back by the other two members of the interview panel. Now, this lady was, at this point, I think, in her 60s, but she was spry, and she was. I wouldn't have fancied my chances, Kevin, to be honest. She was she was pretty dynamic, let's put it that way. But I mean, that just made me giggle, because that was very much her personality. She liked to put people onto the back foot to see how they responded. And while that can be a fantastic thing to get from someone in an interview, I don't think that's the way you necessarily go about it.
No, I think you're absolutely right there. I think that might have put you off ever so slightly. And could you imagine how that interview potentially would have went after that?
Yeah, exactly. I know.
Okay, that is a lovely weird one. That is
Yeah,
really
okay.
weird, but it just shows you what goes on out there.
Oh, absolutely,
It's
absolutely.
it's
And
not what you see in the TV. It's not all standardized and it's not all structured. It's a bit random and it's a bit weird and wonderful. And that example is definitely a bit weird and wonderful.
but I mean, I do understand to a certain extent, what she was trying to do there. But yeah, as you say, what does the aftermath of that look like?
Hmm.
Um, and how are you leaving that poor person? Now, I probably would have taken it quite well, because I knew the person involved. I knew them from previously, from my master's degree. They'd been involved in a certain way there. So I would have had an understanding of the personalities involved. And maybe that's one of the reasons why she was going to do it with me. I don't really know. Um, but apart from that, I mean, I noticed during my last job hunt, Kevin, back in October, November 2023, I noticed a massive shift. I was obviously coming back into the world of employment after being self-employed for a good few years, and the big change during that time had been COVID. Obviously now, I was going from a situation where the majority of my interviews up to that point had always been in person, face to face, and suddenly now 90% was online, virtual interviews via Zoom, Teams, whatever it might be. And I don't think I was fully prepared for that change. I certainly didn't really understand quite how much I rely on body language, on micro gestures, on all those things that we subconsciously absorb from the person in front of us when we are face to face in person, that you don't quite get across a screen, especially not when there's a lag between video and audio, or when you can maybe only see the face and you can't see the hand movements, you can't see other sort of involuntary movements or micro gestures that can often give you a massive clue as to the vibe or the energy in the room. It was a real surprise to me how different that made the interview process. And I went through 14 interviews in October, November 2023. Only 3 of them were in person. So I had to learn very quickly how to adapt to the virtual interview environment. And there was one, and this is just an example of what can go wrong with virtual interviews. One interview I did where I turned up, clicked on the link, I was in the waiting room, and I'm always between 5 and 10 minutes early. It has to be 5 minutes at the very least. I would panic if it was within those 5 minutes. So my 5 minutes came and went. Interview time came, no sign of anybody. Looking at watch, 9:05, still nobody there. And you start thinking to yourself, okay, this could be part of the interview. This could be a bit of a test. Maybe they're just running a bit late with other interviews. All these different things go through your head. All these things that you maybe weren't expecting to have to think about ahead of your interview. So, a little bit more stress, a little bit more pressure. You keep the deep breathing going. You try and keep the focus. You don't panic. But then you start wondering, when should I reach out? When should I come away from this waiting room to send an email to see if everything's okay? When should I start looking for that phone number to contact the person who's meant to be interviewing me, you know. And so there are no rules probably for that sort of scenario, but I gave it until quarter past the hour. So they were 15 minutes late, and I reached out by email and got nothing back. 20 past the hour, I sent another email to a different person. So I'd had 2 or 3 different contacts before this interview took place. And I think it was the third person I emailed who eventually got back to me to tell me that the 2 interviewers were waiting for me in a different waiting room. So it seems like they'd sent me the wrong link for the interview channel. So that wasn't a great way to start the interview. You're going in at this point 25, almost 30 minutes late. And despite this really essentially, let's say it's nobody's fault because these things do happen. I was very much going in on the back foot. The interviewers definitely seemed annoyed and irritated that this had happened. And you just then got the immediate sense that the odds were stacked against you. Now, as you know, all of this happens very, very quickly. And a lot of this is gathered from, usually would be gathered from the body language, the micro gestures, the intonation, the pitch in the voices. And a lot of it can be going on just in your own head. It can be, you could assume one thing that was completely false. But all this to say that it didn't make for a particularly warm, inviting, comfortable, and relaxing interview environment. So, yeah, the virtual environment definitely took a bit of getting used to, and it was a big change for me. But I think I learned to lean into it a lot more. I learned to enjoy it for what it was. I would describe myself as very much being a people person. I think I thrive in the company of others, but it's the face-to-face company, and that's what I really enjoy. And you hear those numbers being thrown about. It's something like, and you'll be able to correct me on this, I know, something like only 5% of our communication is actually the words that you use. The rest of it is the non-verbal communication, the tone, the pitch, the micro gestures, all the things I've talked about already. But I don't think you really notice how true that is until you're suddenly behind the screen instead of in person, face to face.
Yeah, it's very, very, very difficult. And I think that's one of the challenges that COVID has brought is a lot of interviews are now online, especially a lot of first interviews are online. It's a cost-saving exercise as much as anything else. You can be at home, I could be at home. You don't have to rent a room. Do it from your office, do it from your bedroom. That's it. Doesn't cost anything but the time that we're using. Yes, is there the potential for it all going horribly wrong like it did with you? Absolutely. Absolutely. Usually what you find is somebody's internet cuts off. They don't send you the right link. They are always waiting on someone. Their microphone isn't working. It isn't switched on. The camera isn't working. There are so many things that can go wrong with an online interview. But one of the main things about being online, and it doesn't matter if you're interviewing or doing an interview with what we're doing right now, the person speaking needs to bring 100% of the energy when they are speaking. Because there is that loss of those soft skills around your micro expressions, around your body language, you have to then use a different mindset when you're here. When you're talking, you need to be switched on. If you're not, everybody can feel it. But everybody in the room, the virtual room as such, it's complete focus. It almost feels like you're on show all of the time. So you have to be switched on. It's more cognitively draining for people being online doing these interviews. However, it can be a bit of a benefit because you can have your notes in the screen. You can have your notes around the screen. You can have them on the desk. There's lots of positives around it as well. And what I've tended to find is that those people who are really good online tend to be good in person as well, but they've had to work at becoming good. Took you, what, 14 times? And each time you were learning something new. Can you imagine if you stopped after the third or fourth time? You wouldn't be doing what you're doing now. But I suppose the question that myself and all of the listeners wanted to hear was, did you get that job that you went for, that you were late for?
No, I didn't get that job, Kevin. No, and I'll tell you why. I think, as you say, the energy was sucked out of it completely by what had occurred,
Yeah.
and it was dead, is how I would describe it. It was just a dead vibe, and I was completely thrown by it. And you know, I think I think this is something that, exactly what you were saying, to your point, interviewers need to be mindful of, that it is their job to bring the energy. It is their job to create a bit of warmth around the situation. And yes, the interviewee can do their part as well.
Mm.
But as the person in the authoritative position, in the position of power, the interviewer needs to, they have an obligation, I think, to create the scene, to create the scene that they want, how they want to paint their organization. And that's one thing I would say with Young Enterprise, with the job I subsequently ended up getting. And it wasn't necessarily at the end of that job hunt. Actually, I had two interviews with Young Enterprise. One was virtual, one was in person. The virtual one was quite early on in my job hunt, and then obviously there was a bit of a lag, and then we had the in-person interview, and in that in that intervening time, I was doing other interviews as well, because obviously I didn't know how it was all going to go. And what I would say was, I got a great energy from their virtual interview. They did a great job with that compared to the others I'd had. But then when I went into their office and had the in-person interview, I got a great vibe straight away. I got a great energy straight away. And I think sometimes organizations can forget that this works both ways. Yes, they want to see certain things from the applicant, but the applicant wants to see certain things from them as well. Because ultimately, it's not just good enough for you to offer someone a job. They need to say yes. They need to want to work for your organization or work for you. So that definitely, in a way, it was a lesson for me, because I realized that if ever I was hiring anybody, this was something I would definitely need to think about. Was the energy, was how I was portraying the job, the organization, myself, my team. And Young Enterprise got that, to their credit, bang on. They certainly weren't offering me the best in terms of, salary, job title, but what I felt they were offering was an organization that got it, that cared, that put, team, um, above other things. There was a great culture, and it was on show from the word go. And I'm not sure I've necessarily had that in very many interviews prior to that.
And you tend to find that. And it's lovely how you picked up on, this is just not a one-way street. This is a two-way street. This definitely is about, you have an option to say no. Because you don't always get that feeling, and you have to have that feeling when you walk in to somewhere, that, can I spend 40 hours a week in here? Can I work with these individuals? Can I give my time to their mission? Well, if your answer is no, then you potentially be doing both yourself and them a favor by not being there. But creating that culture and putting it on show right from the word go, which, by the way, is a lovely little saying, it is exactly what needs to happen. Exactly what needs to happen. You want employees who want to be there, not have to be there. You want them to be able to jump out of bed and go, I really want to be there every day. And throwing money at people, that's not a motivator. To a point, absolutely. But that doesn't get people out of bed to get them to where they need to be day in, day out, and enjoying what they're doing. That culture is so, so important. And that culture starts from the top. A culture starts from the man or lady who is up at the very top and how they put that culture right down through the very bottom of the organization. And not many
100%.
companies get that. They don't get that, which is unfortunate because there are so many great companies out there and there are so many great employees out there that employees actually leave jobs because of that lack of positive culture. It's not because the money's not great or the location isn't good. There's about 70% of people who leave their jobs are leaving because of the culture. It's ridiculously high. Ridiculously high. When I speak to my clients and ask them why they're leaving their current position, it's always because the work-life balance isn't correct. The money, yeah, to an extent, but every single one of them say it has got harder to work there because of how we are treated.
Mm.
Well, what does employers expect? If you're treating people not not with respect, well, surely that is what's going to happen in return.
Yeah,
I was,
absolutely.
I'm a great believer in you treat people as you would like to be treated. That is, me in a nutshell. But employers treat you like you're on a wheel
Mm.
and you're working, and they just keep dangling that carrot in front of you to keep you working. The carrot potentially is a bonus. It's an extra day off, is something. But eventually, that stops working. That stops becoming a motivator.
Yeah.
And then what you're left with is a shell of a person who actually doesn't want to be there, regardless of how much money you're throwing at them.
And I think another great way of assessing that before you agree to taking a job from an organization is don't be afraid to talk to people who work there already or who have worked there in the past. The ones who have worked there and left are probably the best ones to talk to because they'll give you hopefully the real deal, the story, warts and all, um, and then you can base your decision on facts instead of just
Mm.
how it seems. Because as we both know, sometimes an employer will pull out all the stops to make it look great. I was going to say all for a coat, no knickers. Maybe that's a bit rude, but um, you really do. Certainly something I would do, and maybe this is something. In fact, this is something I learned later on. And it's become easier with social media. Don't be afraid to get onto LinkedIn, have a wee look at who works there, and just send them a wee message and say, look, I hope you don't mind me getting in touch. I've gone for this job role that you're currently advertising. I appreciate that, you know, you maybe don't want to say certain things, but if you wouldn't mind just giving me an idea of what it's like day to day working at the organization or trying to find out who was there before you and chat to them about why they left. I think reaching out is one of the most powerful things that we can do in general. But in this case, I think it can really reap rewards and potentially stop you from going into a job that just isn't right for you.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And I was going to ask what would you recommend for our listeners? But you have done that the whole way through this, which is absolutely superb. I really love how you've really encapsulated the thought process of, well, if I was to give some advice, this is what I would give. And you've done that several times. And I think the listeners will definitely take away lots from this today, Freddie. So thank you. But for me, the takeaways I believe to be extremely important for this interview process are to ensure you gain some valuable experience through volunteering. So it gives you that sort of a leg up on the next person who potentially has the same qualifications, same sort of similar background. But if you have that experience, that'll stand you good stead no matter where you go. It'll also give you some real world experience of potentially going, well, actually, I don't want to actually be here. So that's great takeaway. Another one that you touched on is your network and just how you can utilize your network to help build you up, not just as a business owner, but in a general sense, even if it's just to build up that confidence. And there's a saying I've came across, a friend of mine has said, your network is your net worth. And as a business owner, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more.
Absolutely.
Because you know 10 people, those 10 people might know 10 people, those 10 people might know 10 people, and already you have a network of individuals who are potentially your clients, your customers, or people who can mentor or point you in the right direction. So that was absolutely wonderful. And the last one is definitely about the virtual aspect of interviews now. They're becoming more and more common, but they are seriously challenging. And there's a completely new skill that individuals need to learn before they try to take it on. You know, how do they sit? How do they come across? The lighting, you know, which side of the building should the window be facing? You know, all of these little subtleties. But I'm a great believer in a little by a little becomes a lot. And that's exactly how I see an interview and the process. It's a lot of small, incremental, positive improvements will make a successful interview. And that's what we tried to achieve. All of those tiny, tiny little pieces, consolidate it and stack together to give you exactly what you're looking for. And if people start to realize that as part of the process, they'll stop swinging for the stands and trying to make these big, massive moves. And they'll start building these skills properly so that it's a foundation for them moving forward as opposed to a one-time only. As I tell all of my clients, I am not helping you interview for this job role. I'm helping you interview for the next one and the next one after that.
I like that.
Because it gives them a future and it gives them a hope. And it helps them see past that narrowing of their comfort zone, that shrinking, as we've discussed already. Freddie, thank you very much for today. It's been seriously interesting. You are an absolute wealth of experience and information. So if anybody would want to maybe reach out to you, Freddie, how can they do that?
Well, I'll be honest with you, Kevin. I'm not a massive fan of social media on a personal level, but if they want to find out more about Young Enterprise, we have a strong Instagram channel, Facebook channel. We have a website, of course, and there'll be plenty of information there. If they do want to drop me an email about what we do at Young Enterprise, it's just freddie.harris@yeni.co.uk. So Freddie is FREDDIE .Harris HARRIS and then at yeni.co.uk. And I'll certainly get back to them with whatever information I can.
That's brilliant, Freddie. Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you for being such a giving guest today. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Kevin. Thank you for having me on.
No problem. Okay, folks, look out for our next episode where we will hear more stories and tales from behind the interview curtain. But until then, remember that on the other side of a successful interview is the life you all deserve.
For more details about our guest, or if you would like to be a guest, go to www.interviewskillscoach.co.uk/my-worst-interview-ever, or find us on Facebook or LinkedIn. And remember, on the other side of a successful interview is the life you deserve.